Hey, my name's Ethan. I've never been one for ghost stories or creepy stuff. Always thought that kind of thing was just kids trying to scare each other. But now, well, I'm here to tell you about the night everything changed. This isn't some old horror movie plot. This actually happened to me. And now I can't unsee it. I moved back to my hometown a couple of months ago, needed a break from the city. There was something comforting about being back. Or so I thought. Turns out, I was coming back to something I never understood, something darker. If you're listening, maybe you'll believe me, or maybe you won't. Just don't ignore the warnings like I did. My hometown is the kind of place where nothing ever happens, but everyone always talks about the strange stories, the abandoned factory on the edge of town, the unexplained fires, and those kids who vanished without a trace. No one in my family ever talked about it, like there was some unspoken rule to keep quiet. And I thought that was just because they didn't want to scare me. Now I'm not so sure. Growing up, I wasn't alone in brushing off the stories. My best friend Matt, he'd always push us to test our limits. He'd dare us to sneak into that old factory, saying it was just a building. But what we didn't know was that some things should stay hidden. It was late one night when it all started. I was going through some old stuff I'd left at home. My mom had kept every little thing I owned, a bunch of old clothes, toys, and in the corner of a dusty box, my old flip phone. You know, the kind of phone with no apps, no color screen, barely a camera. I hadn't seen it in years. Just as I picked it up, my current phone buzzed. I checked it, and there was a text from a number I didn't recognize. It simply said, "Do you want to know what happened here?" At first, I thought it was spam, but the more I stared at it, the more I felt uneasy. That number was my old number. I texted back, trying to keep it simple. "Who is this?" I figured it was some prank, maybe someone from high school who'd found my number. But then my phone buzzed again, with a response that made my blood run cold. "You don't remember me, but I remember you. I know what happened here." Now that message, it felt like something was watching me, waiting to see how I'd react. Against every instinct I replied, "What do you mean?" My phone buzzed again, and this time the message just said, "Come to the place you never returned to." I didn't have to think twice. I knew exactly where they meant, the old factory. The next day I decided I couldn't face this alone. Matt was the first person I thought of. He was always the brave one, the kid who'd lead us into every creepy spot he could find. When I called him, he laughed it off. "Come on, Ethan. You're letting a text freak you out? You know it's probably a prank, right?" But then I told him it came from my old number, and he got quiet. "All right," he said finally, "let's check it out. But you're buying the beers after." I couldn't help but laugh. That was Matt. Nothing ever shook him. We roped in a couple more friends, Jordan and Liz, friends from high school who'd been in on our midnight adventures. Jordan was a skeptic, the guy who'd always say there was a logical explanation. Liz, on the other hand, loved the thrill of a good scare. We met up that night, flashlights in hand, ready for whatever we might find. "So, we're really doing this, huh?" Jordan asked, already looking uneasy. Liz just grinned. "It's just an old factory, Jordan. What's the worst that could happen?" Little did we know, we were about to find out. As we made our way to the factory, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The gates creaked open, and the place looked just as creepy as I remembered. Rusted machines, broken windows, and graffiti covered every wall. It looked like time had stopped here. We stepped inside, and the air grew thick, almost hard to breathe. Shadows stretched along the walls, seeming to move with us. Jordan shone his flashlight around, chuckling nervously. "Guess the ghosts missed us." But something about the place felt alive, like it was holding its breath. We walked deeper into the factory, our footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Matt tried to joke around, but his voice sounded strained. Then, out of nowhere, we heard it. A low whisper, almost like a breath. We all froze, exchanging nervous glances. "Did anyone else hear that?" Liz asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's probably just the wind," Jordan said, trying to sound confident, but he looked as freaked out as the rest of us. And then, my phone buzzed again. I pulled it out, my hands shaking, and saw the message. "Keep going. You're almost there." The message led us down a corridor we'd never ventured down before. It was darker, colder. At the end of it, we found a room with strange markings on the floor. A broken circle surrounded by symbols we couldn't understand. Liz knelt down to examine it, running her fingers over the lines. "These look recent," she muttered. "You think someone's been here?" I asked, my voice shaky. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Not someone," she said. "Something." I tried to laugh it off, but the fear in her voice was unmistakable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had made those markings was watching us. After that night, things started to get worse. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear whispers, feel shadows moving around me. One night, I woke up and saw a figure standing at the end of my bed. It was only there for a second, but it was enough to leave me shaking. I tried calling Matt to talk about it, but he didn't pick up. The next day, he told me he'd seen something too, a face in his bathroom mirror that wasn't his own. "This isn't funny, Ethan," he said, sounding more scared than I'd ever heard him. "I don't know what we got ourselves into, but it's real." Our group started falling apart. Liz was angry, blaming me for bringing them back to the factory. Jordan stopped talking to us altogether, saying he wanted no part of it. Only Matt stuck around, but I could tell he was on edge, barely sleeping. One night, as we sat together, trying to make sense of it all, Matt whispered, "Do you ever think we were meant to find it?" I didn't know how to answer, but deep down, I felt it too, like we'd been drawn into something that had been waiting, watching, all these years. Over the next few days, things got even worse. Each of us seemed to be experiencing something terrifying and unexplainable. I'd hear whispers at night, faint voices that sounded like they were coming from inside my room. Liz told me she kept seeing someone out of the corner of her eye, a shadow that would vanish when she turned to look. Jordan even admitted, reluctantly, that he'd been waking up with scratches on his arms. One evening, Matt showed up at my door looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Ethan, I can't keep doing this," he whispered, eyes wide. "It's like the factory followed us back here." I wanted to reassure him, tell him it was just our minds playing tricks, but I couldn't even convince myself of that. Then, the messages changed. Instead of cryptic instructions, they became direct, sinister. I'd get texts like, "You shouldn't have returned," or, "You're part of this now." Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would pound, dreading what new message awaited me. I started to wonder, was there something I had done? Some part of the factory's secret that we'd unlocked by going back? Matt was barely holding it together. He kept saying he was seeing things, figures in his house, faces in his mirrors. We tried not to talk about it, but the tension hung over us like a dark cloud. It felt like we were each being haunted, marked somehow, for daring to go back. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I needed answers, a way to understand what was happening to us. I went to the town library, hoping to find anything about the factory, about why it had shut down, and why the town seemed to avoid talking about it. After hours of searching through dusty archives, I found something. An old newspaper article about a fire that had broken out in the factory years ago. Several workers were killed, but some were listed as missing, their bodies never recovered. And there was something even stranger. Reports of figures seen leaving the factory that night, vanishing into the woods. Witnesses claimed the factory itself had a presence, like it was somehow alive. The next night, I decided to go back to the factory. I knew it was dangerous, but it felt like I had no other choice. Maybe if I went back, I could find something to stop this, to break whatever curse was haunting us. Matt tried to stop me, practically begging me not to go. "You don't know what's waiting for you there, Ethan," he warned, his voice trembling. But I was determined. I grabbed a flashlight, a camera, and my phone. The messages had led me there before, and I hoped they'd guide me again. As I entered the factory alone, the air felt colder, sharper, like it was cutting into my skin. Every step echoed, the silence pressing in on me. I wandered through the factory, deeper than we'd ever gone before. I was almost ready to turn back when my flashlight flickered, illuminating a strange room at the end of the corridor. It was the same one with the broken circle we'd seen on our first visit, but now it looked different, like someone had been there recently. Symbols covered the walls, drawn in what looked like chalk, and strange items, pieces of wood, a jar of salt, a tattered notebook were scattered around. I opened the notebook and it was filled with drawings, diagrams, and words in a language I didn't recognize. But one phrase, written over and over, stood out. Those who seek will find, and those who find will suffer. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Whatever this was, it was more than just a game. Just as I was about to leave, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow moving along the wall. I froze, holding my breath. It was barely visible, more like an outline than a figure, but it was there, watching me. Slowly, it drifted closer, moving toward the broken circle on the floor. I couldn't move, couldn't even think as it hovered there, almost as if it was waiting for something. Then my phone buzzed. A new message. Welcome to the game. The shadow seemed to react to the sound, as if it heard it too. And just like that, it vanished. I ran out of the factory, my heart pounding. When I told the others what I'd seen, they were horrified. Matt was furious, saying I'd put us all in danger by going back. Whatever you did there, Ethan, you made it worse. It's like you woke it up. Liz and Jordan looked pale, avoiding eye contact. The fear in their eyes was unmistakable, and that night we all agreed, no more factory, ever. Over the next few days, things went from bad to worse. Liz's shadowy figure became more frequent, lingering longer each time. Jordan found strange symbols drawn in dust on his mirrors, symbols that matched the ones we'd seen in the factory. Matt barely left his house, saying he could hear whispers calling his name at all hours. And me? I started seeing the shadow from the factory. At night, in my room, just standing there, watching. Desperate for answers, I went to the town cemetery. I'd heard rumors that some of the missing workers from the factory were buried there. I figured maybe if I could find their graves, I'd get some kind of clue. Walking through the cemetery at night was unsettling, the silence broken only by the crunch of gravel under my feet. I found the graves, 5 unmarked stones, each with a simple date, the night of the fire. As I stood there, my phone buzzed. A message appeared, reading, "They're waiting for you. Midnight." I felt a chill down my spine, and as I turned to leave, I swore I saw shadows moving among the tombstones. Then, one by one, my friends started disappearing. First, it was Liz. She was supposed to meet up with us, but she never showed. Her parents said she'd been acting strangely, locking herself in her room, claiming she was seeing things. Then she was gone, no trace, no note. Jordan went next. His mom said he'd been drawing strange symbols on his walls, muttering about the shadows. Matt tried to stay in touch, but one night his messages stopped. Just silence. I was alone. All I had left were the memories and the messages that kept coming, reminding me of every friend I'd lost. "This is your fault," one read. "They're with me now." My heart sank, guilt eating away at me. Had I really doomed them all? I became obsessed. I needed to understand what had happened, why this curse or whatever it was had latched onto us. I spent hours reading up on occult symbols, trying to make sense of the strange markings we'd seen. Every article, every diagram, only deepened my paranoia. I barely slept, the shadows seeming to press in on me, whispering my name. Then I received another message. Return to the beginning, midnight. I knew what it meant. I had to go back to the factory, alone. That night, I went back to the factory one last time. The place felt different, colder, darker, almost like it was waiting for me. As I entered, I saw them, shadows, hovering at the edges of the room, watching. I walked to the center where the broken circle lay and waited. My phone buzzed, a final message appearing on the screen. "You are one of us now." And then the shadows closed in, surrounding me, their cold touch like ice against my skin. The last thing I remember is a whisper in my ear telling me, "This is only the beginning." After that night at the factory, everything changed. The shadows followed me everywhere. At home, on the street, even in my dreams. It felt like they were always watching, waiting for me to slip up. I'd see them in mirrors, in dark corners, fleeting but unmistakable. They whispered my name, faint but insistent, and I was powerless to stop them. I tried talking to people, but no one would listen. My parents thought I was losing my mind, my friends had vanished, and even the townspeople looked at me with suspicion like they knew I'd done something wrong. I was completely, utterly alone. Sleep became a nightmare. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd find myself back in the factory, wandering the dark halls, hearing my friends' voices echoing through the walls. Liz's laughter, Matt's footsteps, Jordan's low murmurs. It was like they were all there with me, trapped, calling out to me. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat, convinced someone was in my room. I turned on the light and there they were. Shadows on the wall, standing still, their hollow eyes fixed on me. And just as I blinked, they were gone. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Another message. You can't hide. You're ours. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It felt like they were closing in, tightening around me. With nowhere else to turn, I became obsessed with finding out more about the factory. I went back to the town archives, combing through every record I could find. That's when I discovered something chilling. Other kids, just like us, had gone missing over the years. Each disappearance was shrouded in mystery, but there was a common link. They'd all visited the factory before they vanished. The more I read, the more my skin crawled. It was like the factory was some kind of trap, a lure that drew people in and kept them there. A cursed place, bound to the souls of those who entered and never left. I had the sinking feeling that I was next, that it was only a matter of time. Desperation took hold. I scoured the occult books I'd gathered, looking for anything that could help. One book mentioned a ritual of protection, something that could supposedly break a curse or sever a bond. It required a sacrifice, something personal, something valuable. I didn't hesitate. I gathered everything I had from my childhood, memories that tied me to this town, my old photos, trophies, and yes, even that cursed flip phone. I burned them in the dead of night, hoping it would be enough. For a moment, I felt relief, like maybe, just maybe, I'd freed myself. For a few days, things were quiet. No more whispers, no more shadows. I dared to believe it was over, that I'd finally broken free. I even started thinking about leaving town, starting fresh somewhere else. But deep down, I knew it was just a matter of time. The final message came 2 nights later. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up in the dark. The message was simple. It's time. Midnight. My heart sank. I knew exactly what it meant. The factory was calling me back for the last time. It felt like a death march as I walked through the empty streets, the cold night air biting at my skin. I reached the factory gates just as the clock struck midnight, and they creaked open as if they'd been waiting. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of rust and decay. The shadows were everywhere, pooling in corners, lingering along the walls. I walked into the main hall, and there they were. My friends, standing in a row, their faces pale and blank, like they were asleep. I called out to them, but they didn't respond. They just stood there, silent and still. And then, I saw it. A figure at the far end of the room, shrouded in darkness, barely visible. It was the same shadow I'd seen so many times, but now it was solid, real. It moved toward me, slow and deliberate, stopping just a few feet away. A voice filled the room, cold and hollow. You've come far, Ethan. But you knew this was where it would end. My heart pounded, fear paralyzing me. The voice continued. They're all here because of you. Your curiosity, your need for answers, it's what binds them here. And now, you'll join them. The figure reached out, its shadowy hand hovering inches from my face. There's one way out, it whispered. One last choice to make. Sacrifice yourself, or find another to take your place. My mind raced, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. If I sacrificed myself, would it end here? Would I finally set everyone free? Or was this all part of its twisted game, just another trick? I didn't know what to do. Didn't know if I could live with myself if I chose someone else. But I knew I couldn't stay here. I closed my eyes, feeling the cold seep into my bones. I whispered, "Let them go. Take me instead." The air shifted, and I felt the weight lift, like something had released its hold on me. When I opened my eyes, the figure was gone, and so were my friends. I was alone in the factory, the silence pressing in around me. I stumbled outside, my heart racing, feeling like I'd just barely escaped. But as I reached the street, my phone buzzed one last time. I looked down, dreading what I'd see, and there it was, a final message. It's not over, this is just the beginning. I left town that night, disappearing without a word. I changed my name, my number, everything. But the shadows never left. Every now and then, I'll catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. A flicker of movement in a dark room. I know they're still watching, waiting for the day I slip up. I've tried to forget, tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare. But deep down, I know that the factory isn't done with me. It's just a matter of time. This was my story, but now that you've heard it, maybe it's yours too. Maybe you'll start noticing the shadows, the whispers, the feeling that something's watching. If you do, don't answer. Walk away. Don't look back. Some things are better left forgotten. If you found this story captivating, like, subscribe, and share. And remember, when curiosity calls, sometimes it's better not to listen. Until next time, sleep well.